This week on the College Football Roundup, Miami vanquishes Ole Miss. Indiana pummels Oregon. The SEC decline continues for another year and so much more. This is the Money Report, starting now. All right. Hello, everybody. It is Monday, January 12th, 2026. And this is the Monday Report. I'm your host, H. James K. And today we are going to be talking about the College Football Playoff Semifinal games that were. And then we will be giving you a preview of the College Football National Championship game between the Indiana Hoosiers and the Miami Hurricanes. All right, let's jump right into it. So, the first of the two College Football Playoff Semifinal games was a great game between Miami and Ole Miss. The final score was 31-27 Miami. Carson Beck went 23 of 37 for 268 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He also had 12 carries for 6 yards and 1 touchdown. 12 carries for -6 yards and 1 touchdown. My bad. Trinidad Chambliss of Ole Miss went 23 of 37, also, for 277 yards with 1 touchdown. He also had 5 carries for 7 yards. The thing that really made the difference, in my opinion, was the run game. Miami running back Mark Fletcher Jr. had 22 carries for 133 yards. His rushing performance I thought was really impressive. It was just lots and lots of tough run-in, and there wasn't any he busted off like a 57-yarder, and no, it was just 7, 8, 6, 4 on a clutch short yardage down. It was just tough, demoralizing, break your soul kind of running, which I think is always great. On the side of Ole Miss, Kawan Lacey had 11 carries for 103 yards, but 73 yards of that was one single 73-yard touchdown run. He did pull a hamstring on that 73-yarder, and it did hamper him for the rest of the game, forcing Ole Miss to run most of their offense through Trinidad Chambliss instead of the running back, which they like to be a little more balanced, but his hamstring injury was what it was. So my thoughts on the game. Ole Miss played the part of the scrappy underdog that relies on big plays to stay in the game. Miami's defense was just everywhere. They had multiple opportunities to intercept the ball, and they didn't. Last I remember, the number was 3. And it was one of these things where Miami, the game could have been a blowout, but it wasn't. But that's because the offense, and we'll get to that later. But the Miami defense, considering what they were having to defend against, Trinidad Chambliss, who is great, he's off to the league because his waiver for a 6th year was denied. So that's the last we're going to see of him in a college uniform. But the point remains, the Ole Miss offense was explosive enough that containing them, there wasn't going to be no shutting them down. You weren't going to disrupt them to the point where their offense didn't function. They're too explosive. They're too talented. Too well coached. But slowing them down and making life hard was all that really mattered. If not for that 73-yard touchdown, this game would have been a laugher. Miami was in firm control, and yes, it got close down the stretch, but there were a series of massive plays, that big long run, a couple of huge clutch deep throws that kind of keep Ole Miss going because they couldn't just get 5 or 6 or 7 yards with regularity. It was like chunk play, bad play, chunk play. And for Ole Miss, it was a lot of, how do I put this? A lot of stopping and starting. There wasn't a lot of long multi-play drives. There wasn't a lot of 15-play, 82-yard drives with a touchdown. That really wasn't how the Ole Miss offense was functioning. It was 6 plays for 47 yards, field goal, etc., etc., etc. And that came down to the Miami defense. So the Miami defense was just, I'd argue they're the most physical defense in the country. That D-line is disgusting. And when Miami had their starting DBs in, they were giving Ole Miss all sorts of trouble, and it wasn't really until Ole Miss started having some bad injury luck in the secondary, and they're having to play like true freshmen and redshirt freshmen, guys who really hadn't seen a lot of field time during the season. It wasn't really until then when Ole Miss finally got things going on offense. On the other side of the ball, the Miami offense, they weren't sexy. There was no flow. And I would argue that Carson Beck didn't play very well, to be honest with you. There were multiple throws where it's like if he just threw a catchable ball downfield, they probably win by 3 scores. Like I bet there was 100 yards of offense left on the field for plays where he didn't throw an accurate ball and didn't give a receiver a chance to go up and get a ball for massive, 20, 30-yard chunk plays. There were even some wide open touchdowns on multiple drives where you're like, dude, if you just hit that dang ball, it's going to be a massive touchdown. And that came down to Beck. He wasn't accurate like he was against Ohio State and against Texas A&M, even though he threw for very few yards in a lot of those games. He was efficient and mistake-free, whereas he had an interception and he had several sacks. Another thing that I thought played into this game, the reason why this game wasn't as much of a blowout is against Texas A&M and Ohio State, Miami played very mistake-free football. Not a lot of penalties, not a lot of turnovers, not a lot of negative plays. Against Ole Miss, there were a lot of penalties. Now, I will say part of that is Rod Snodgrass was the head of the Big Ten crew who was officiating the game. And Snodgrass calls pass interference very, very, very tight. He always has. The fact that I know his name should tell you that as a Michigan fan, I've been griping about him for like 10 years. It used to be John O'Neill. John O'Neill used to be the guy who went, ugh, John O'Neill's officiating, we're going to lose. But these days it's Rod Snodgrass, who I don't like how he calls the game because he lets them play on certain things but not pass interference. So you'll get tons of ticky-tack like, dude, that's really soft. That's not really a PI. And yet he'll call them anyway. Either way, Miami committed a ton of penalties and so did Ole Miss. And there were a lot of times where Miami could have gotten Ole Miss off the field, but they gave them a first down because of penalties. And that's just not something they did against Ohio State and against Texas A&M. Ultimately what this game came down to is that Miami just demoralized Ole Miss in the trenches. Plain and simple. That's it. They just stole Ole Miss's soul. And they refused to give it back. And that's how, honestly, I think that's what championship football is going to look like in the portal era. The days of high-flying offenses that defense is kind of just a vibes thing and, we don't care that much. That's over. No. The teams that are going to win in the playoffs from now on are going to be experienced, disciplined, and very, very physical. That's the winning combo. Michigan in 23, Ohio State in 24. It's looking like Indiana and Miami are both that same mold this year. That's just kind of what the blueprint is becoming, is physical, disciplined, good defense. So I thought this was a great game. I thought Miami versus Ole Miss was an all-time great college football playoff game. It was just down to the wire, lots of momentum shifts, towering highs, and crushing lows for both teams. I supremely enjoyed this game, and I know my dad did as well. We were watching it, it's just like, this game is nuts. It's freaking awesome. All right, let's move on to the other game that happened. Oh boy. Indiana took on Oregon and beat Oregon by a score of 56-22. And don't let that fool you, ladies and gentlemen. That 22 is a deceptive 22. Because for a long time there, it was like 35 to like 6. And then it was 49 to 14. Or, yeah, something like that. 49 to 15. 49 to 15, yeah, that's what it was. The game was over from the start. It reminded me of the Fallout New Vegas meme. Sorry, kid, game was rigged from the start, and then he gets shot in the face, at the beginning of the game. That's what this game was like. It was like, sorry, Ducks, game's over. But we haven't even kicked off yet. I know, but the game is still over. You're going to lose. Fernando Mendoza, Indiana's quarterback, he went 17 of 20. That's 3 incompletions for 177 yards, 5 passing touchdowns, 6 carries for 28 yards. For the second time in a row, he had more touchdowns than incompletions. If I remember correctly, Fernando Mendoza is the only player only the second player this century to have more than 2 of those in a season. And Mendoza, if you count the playoffs, he has 5 of those this year. So, I was peeking out a little bit there. Whoops. So it's one of these things where that kind of dominance is just, if anyone wants to know why he won the dang Heisman Trophy, watch the playoffs. What he has been doing in the playoffs is all you need to know as to why Fernando Mendoza won the dang Heisman. The dude has been a dang surgeon. He has been slicing and dicing defenses. And this isn't like, he played defense number 85 in the country. No. He's played 3 top 12 defenses in the country, and he's battered every single one of them. That's excellence. Plain and simple. Dante Moore, on the other hand, not so excellent. So Dante Moore, Oregon's QB, everyone was assuming that he was, first overall pick in the draft, going to the Raiders, that kind of thing. But I think he might have played himself out of the first overall pick. Because, he went 24 of 39, which doesn't sound bad, for 285 yards. That's a perfectly great stat line so far. 2 touchdowns. All right. We're doing okay. 1 interception. It's not great. 5 carries for negative 28 yards. That's bad. Oh, and 2 lost fumbles, which is even worse. Yes, so that interception was on the first play from scrimmage. He threw a pick 6. And it was Dante Moore takes a snap, looks to his left, throws an out route that never should have been thrown. And then Indiana said, I'm going to take that. And they went back and took it all the way to the crib, all the way to the house. And it was 7-0 with 11 seconds left. 11 seconds having passed in the first quarter. And oh my gosh. Full disclosure, I was rooting for Indiana because Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, is like a second home to me. As you all know, I'm a huge Indy 500 fan, IndyCar fan, and I've been going to Indianapolis my whole life. So I have a real soft spot for the state of Indiana. So obviously, I'm rooting for the Indiana Hoosiers to win it all in this playoffs. Since my Michigan Wolverines didn't make it. Grumble, grumble, grumble. But anyway, as soon as I saw that interception, after I stopped laughing, of course, I said, game's over. This is a wrap. You just knew. It was like, it's going to be one of those games. Okay. And the game was over. Even though it was just beginning, it was just, once that happened, it's like, Oregon has no chance. And the 2 fumbles, one of them was because of the Indiana defense, and the other one was Dante Moore was doing an RPO, and he pulled the ball, and he's going to throw it, and he just whacked his arm on his running back's shoulder, and it forced a fumble deep in Oregon territory, and Indiana recovered it. Both fumbles were bad, and I'm pretty sure IU blocked a punt, if I remember correctly. It was days ago, but did they do that? Yes. Yes, I'm pretty sure they blocked a punt as well because they had like 28 points off of turnovers. Like half of their points were turnovers. From turnovers. It was crazy. Other big notable guys with stats. Indiana wide receiver Elijah Surratt. Dude is a beast. He's deceptively quick. He's a good route runner. He's a physical receiver. He had 7 catches for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. He caught 41% of Mendoza's completions for 42% of Mendoza's passing yardage, which is called dominance. It was like, look, there's Elijah Surratt again. Oh, look, he caught another touchdown. It was just, the dude was everywhere for Indiana's offense, and Ole Miss had a lot of trouble stopping him, to be honest with you. They didn't have it, you know? Oregon, on the other hand, they ran 26 times for 93 yards as a team, which isn't horrible, but it's not great. It's not even good. Many would argue it's decidedly mediocre, and considering that's like 3.6 yards per carry, I think, that's just bad. You know, and that speaks to a much broader point about the game. Man, that Indiana defense is something. They don't make a mistake. They remind me of the 2023 Michigan defense, where they're so technically sound and so well coached that it's like watching an NFL defense. They do not make a mistake. Like, I saw a run play where it was like a fourth down and short. They knew the play almost before Oregon did. Their entire linebacking core shifted to Oregon's left to meet the runner as before he even got there. They shifted as soon as the play started. It was like, oh, they know exactly where it's going. Excuse me. So, and Indiana has been so dominant that people on Twitter are starting to ask questions of whether or not they're cheating, which, how dare you? Indiana is not cheating. That is just malarkey. It's, to use some language, that's complete bullshit. And it's bullshit like that tells me that people just refuse to believe what their eyes are telling them, which is that Indiana they're like that. You know, they are that good. They don't make mistakes like that. And their defense just pulverized Oregon's offense. Nothing was easy. Nothing had momentum. It was just big plays and penalties sustaining drives in garbage time, long after the game is out of reach, and Indiana's not exactly trying as hard as they would if it was like, 15-15 or whatever. Anyways, Indiana is just something. It's like, I got to halftime and I was like, Miami's got to play this team? Good luck with that. You know what I mean? It's like that was the game was done. It was 35-3 at halftime. It's just like, what do you even do? What do you even do there? You know, if you're Oregon, how do you even like compute? And the answer is you don't. You're out of it, you know? But my gosh, it was just incredible. It was absolutely astounding to watch. Now let's pivot towards the future for the College Football National Championship game that is happening soon. Indiana is taking on the Miami Hurricanes at the College Football Playoff National Championship presented by AT&T, which is taking place at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly where the Miami Hurricanes play their home games. They share a stadium with the Dolphins. And they'll be the first team in the playoff era to play the national championship in their home stadium, and they'll be the first team since the last time they did it back in like the 80s to play for and win a national championship in their own stadium. Oh, sorry, back in like the 90s, like early to mid 90s, I think. The game is on Thursday, January 19th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on ESPN, just like all these other late stage playoff games have been. Indiana is favored by an entire 7.5 points. Holy crap. Being favored by that many points in a championship game tells you that Vegas is like, oh yeah, it's going to be bad. I saw that and I was like, oh man, they don't expect Miami to even be, to compete. Because you're never going to make a line bigger than that in a national championship game. That would be crazy. You could never justify a line much bigger than 7.5. So 7.5, that might as well be like saying, oh yeah, they're going to lose by like 24. I mean, that's an insane margin for, a point spread. Key players for Indiana, obviously quarterback Fernando Mendoza. Does the hyper-efficient play continue against Miami's excellent defense? By extension, does Miami's defense, can they keep their physical dominating play up with injuries? Are they going to be healthy? Because they had some serious defensive back injuries during their game against Ole Miss, and it begs to be seen, can the Miami defense, play well enough to disrupt Fernando Mendoza and his all-time great tear that he's been on in the last 3 games. Another one is Indiana linebacker Aiden Fisher. Dude is just a beast. He had like 1.5 sacks, and he had like 9 tackles, like 7 of which were solo tackles against Oregon. He's just a great linebacker, and if he has a game like he had against Oregon, if he has a really disruptive game, I think it's going to be a wrap. Because if the linebackers are flying around and being disruptive, I don't know if this Miami offense. Because here's the thing about the Miami offense: the Miami offense is not built to chase. They're not built for a shootout. They're built to take a lead and sit on the lead and win ugly. Well, here's the problem. So is Indiana, but they're better at it. And if Indiana jumps out on them early, like they did against Oregon, like they did against Alabama, if they do that to Miami, I don't know if Miami's offense is going to be able to claw their way back in it because of their, they lack a little bit of consistency and explosiveness in the passing game. So if Aiden Fisher, and by extension the Indiana defense, is playing up to snuff, it's probably a wrap. So key players for Miami, obviously quarterback Carson Beck. Can he play efficient, clean game? Dante Moore couldn't. Ty Simpson couldn't. If Carson Beck can play a clean game, now, even if that means he has like 15 completions of 22 attempts for 111 yards and a touchdown. Even if that is his stat line. If he does that, I think Miami has a chance to win the game. But if he's like 24 of 37 for 229 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and 5 sacks, I think there's no way. If he's making mistakes and he's inaccurate, and I think the inaccuracy and the turnovers are going to be more important than the raw yardage totals. Because if he's making a lot of incompletions, that means that they're probably not sustaining drives. And you couple that with turnovers, and that's how you get an Indiana blowout. So even if it's conservative, low yardage, if he's more efficient with his completions, I think that is ultimately a better outcome for Miami's offense. Now, the other one is obviously Malachi Toney. If the young phenom receiver, if he has another game like he did against Ole Miss, Miami's got a shot. They got a real shot. If Indiana bottles him up and kind of, keeps everything kind of clamped down, I don't think they'll be explosive enough to make that work if Malachi Toney's not a factor, so to speak. Keys of the game. Can Miami limit Indiana's possessions while taking advantage of their own? So this is the key. If Miami wants to win, they need to keep Indiana off the field. Indiana is not some high-powered C.J. Stroud, Chris Olave kind of offense. But every time they get the ball, they seem to score a touchdown. Like, they've scored a touchdown on, like, 11 of, like, 16 possessions that they've had in the playoffs. They score a touchdown. It's basically, you give them a touchdown, and they got more than a 50-50 chance of getting a touchdown on every single drive. So for Miami, the goal, you've got to stop them multiple times. You got to keep them from putting a long drive together. And at the same time, you have got to take your limited possessions, because possessions are going to be at a premium. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if both of these teams had 7 possessions each. Long drive, lots of clock chewing. So if with those 7 drives, if you're Miami, you got to take advantage of your 7. You got to cash in probably 4 of those 7 drives to have any shot. Because Indiana will do 4 out of their 7. They'll get a touchdown on that many. So for Miami, you got to be efficient on offense. You've got to have long drives that burn up clock that result in touchdowns. Not get 2 first downs and punt. Not drive 45 yards and kick a field goal. You got to go long, sustained drives that are methodical and physical and result in a touchdown. That is going to be crucial for Miami. If they can't do that, they will lose. If they can do that, that's what they're gonna. I mean, that's the way. That's the path. It's like Paul Atreides in Dune. I see the path. That is the path forward for Miami, because they're just not explosive enough and not consistent enough to get into a 41-43 kind of shootout with a team like Indiana, because Indiana is just too perfect. They don't make mistakes. Now the other key to the game, can Beck play an efficient, clean game? Much like my thing with Oregon versus Indiana, I think the impetus on changing the outcome of this game is on Miami, because if this game plays out business as usual, Indiana will win. Because they are the better coach team, the more talented team, and that's in spite of the fact that Miami's blue chip ratio is way better than Indiana. Like, Indiana has like 8 4- and 5-star recruits. Miami has dozens and dozens. So that's the thing. Miami, if they want to win this game, that's gonna be on them. They got to play perfect. They got to be penalty free, turnover free. You got to score and score and score on your few drives that you get. You got to make it count. Think of it this way: Indiana, they've got a machine gun. They got 20 bullets in the chamber. They got 20 bullets in their magazine. They're explosive enough that they can miss a couple of times. Indiana, they're going to be able to afford mistakes. Not that I think they'll make any, but they can miss sometimes. That's what I was trying to say. Miami, on the other hand, they're a 6-shot revolver. You got 6 shots. You better hit, because once those 6 are gone, you're dead. That's the difference. It's like 20 shots versus 6 shots. And that machine gun can fire fast. They can be explosive and jump out on you, and before you know it, like, oh my God, we're down 21 points. What the heck happened? It's only the first quarter. The game is over. Miami, slower. Bang. Pull the hammer back. Bang. Pull the hammer back. Bang. That's what it's going to take. It's going to be ugly. If it's high scoring, they're going to lose. If it's low scoring and ugly and physical, Miami can win. They got to drag Indiana into the mud. They got to be efficient and methodical and, above all, more physical than Indiana. If Indiana is allowed to set the tone, you're going to lose. If Indiana is allowed to jump out on you, you're going to lose. I would almost argue Miami's going to have to get a lead and keep it. Because if Indiana gets a lead, they're going to run away with this thing. That's the kind of game we're seeing here. We're looking down the barrel. And this isn't like, some homer, he just wants Indiana to win. No, I have eyes. Oregon is good. Alabama is good. Do the math. 38-3. 56-22. I mean, that's like 100 and... Man, what is that? That's 80... It's like 104 to 25 or something like that. I mean, that's 2 games, and those are 2 great, well-coached, talented teams, and it was like they weren't even there. They just went right through them. So that, Indiana is just, they're like that. So my prediction, I am predicting that Indiana is going to win 32-16. I think it'll be over by halftime. If you had to ask, like you put a gun on my head, said, what's the score going to be at halftime? Oh, what would I say? Probably 17-6 at halftime. Something like that. So I just don't anticipate. I think it's going to be like the 2023 game where it never looks like it's a blowout, but it's never in doubt. Indiana is just out front, in control the whole way. So that's kind of my thinking on that game. I'm still going to enjoy watching it though, because gotta love college football. Now, the next thing I want to talk about before we get to some quick hits is I want to talk about the shift we're kind of seeing in college football, where for the last 25 years, the SEC has just dominated. Like 2006 to 2020, it was just all SEC all the time. Or hell, 2022. So, why was the SEC so dominant? There's a couple of factors. So, geography matters. The southern teams have better climate. Better players naturally go where the better weather is. No one likes playing in the snow. So a lot of guys would rather go down south and stay down south, even if they're on an inferior team, because they're playing in better weather and they're closer to home. And another thing, reputation. It's kind of self-fulfilling. The SEC was dominant because they had the best players. They had the best players because they're dominant. And they're dominant because they had the best players. And they had the best players because they're dominant. And it just kind of fed in on itself perpetually to where nothing ever changed. It just reloaded itself all the time. It's a machine gun. It's a belt-fed machine gun. It just put the next shot in the chamber. Bang, 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 bang. Year after year after year. And a lot of that was Alabama. And a couple of those were Georgia. But the point remains, Florida like twice, Auburn, LSU, Alabama like 7 times, Georgia twice in a row. It became self-fulfilling. Why did the Big Ten lag behind? As I said, geography. It's harder to get teams to come up north. The Big Ten was viewed as an old, outdated conference that didn't believe in the forward pass, that didn't have sexy offenses, and wouldn't win national championships. And because it wasn't viewed that you could win a national championship in the Big Ten, players went down south to win a championship. Once again, the cycle repeats itself, and it's self-fulfilling, and it's self-repeating, and it never stops. And then what changed? The portal, NIL. So, it is no secret that high-value college football teams, especially the teams down south, have been paying players on the down low. I mean, do you really think all these high-profile, hotshot college players down south could afford a brand new $150,000 Corvette because of their job at the Barnes & Noble on campus? Give me a break. No, it's because the athletic department set their family up with a car dealership so they could get cars on the sly, blah, blah, blah. And yes, the Big Ten, no doubt, engaged in this behavior, but you cannot tell me that they did it as well as the teams down south did. They just didn't. And Ed Orgeron has admitted that, oh yeah, we paid people. It used to be you had to take the brown paper bag full of money in the back door, but now you just bring it in the front door with you when you go in to talk to players. So NIL, and we'll start with NIL. being able to pay players unlocks an entirely different dimension for a lot of teams up north, because while the South is a growing economic powerhouse and there is a lot of new money down south, the Midwest and the Grain Belt and the East and West Coasts have a lot of old money. Old, entrenched, been there, done that kind of money. A lot of the teams up north have much bigger alumni bases. Indiana has the biggest one in the country. Michigan is like number 4. Ohio State's like number 5 or 6, I think. There's a lot of teams up north with massive alumni bases that are very wealthy with lots of money to spend. And NIL allowed these northern teams to tap into the fact that, hey, Larry Ellison, I know your girlfriend went to Michigan. You want to help us, pay Bryce Underwood? Cool. Michigan doesn't land Bryce Underwood 10 years ago. A guy like Bryce Underwood goes to play for LSU because they'd pay him under the table, and they had the boosters that could support their athletic departments, unlike the teams up north. You can't tell me that that's not a factor. It is a factor. But NIL doesn't hurt the SEC's underlying advantage, which was depth. How often did you see guys sit on Bama's roster for 3 years, waiting for their one turn to play as a senior and then go to the league? You saw it year after year after year. Teams were like, my God, their third string could be a middle-of-the-pack Big Ten team. Or they could be a Big Ten championship team, their third stringers, because their teams were just so stacked. Well, the transfer portal kind of took care of that. Because suddenly, so you're telling me I can make 6 figures and start if I go play for Rutgers or Nebraska or Oklahoma State or Texas Tech or Michigan or Oregon or any team that's not in the Southeastern Conference? Sign me up. The transfer portal NIL combo has gutted everybody. And this goes along with everybody. You see? Nobody has depth. Depth is an illusion. Teams that have depth don't. If you lose your top guys, much like the NFL, if you lose your top line guys, you're screwed. If you lose your starting running back, your starting 2 of your starting wide receivers, and 3 of your starting O-linemen, well, guess what? Your offense is just going to kind of suck this year. So all of a sudden, all of these teams that have been kind of gotten complacent on the fact that, yeah, we're just going to have more depth than everybody. We may not win everything, but we're still going to be better than some of the upper echelon of these other power conferences. Those days are gone. That's over. That party is done. So suddenly, all of these southern teams that could just bank on being able to have distinct geographic, financial, and institutional advantages, they just don't have those advantages anymore. They got to play the game the same as everyone else on the same playing field as everyone else. And we're starting to see a lot of bad coaching in the SEC. A lot of guys that just aren't up to it. And what we've seen recently is guys like Dan Lanning. He coaches for Oregon. Kurt Signetti. He coaches for Indiana. These are guys who were in the Nick Saban coaching tree. The Kirby Smart, the Nick Saban tree for both of them. A lot of Kirby Smart disciples are going up north to coach Big Ten teams because that's where a lot of the money is right now. So what we're seeing is suddenly the Big Ten has access to very wealthy billionaire donors and lots of alumni. There's no longer an incentive to stay and be buried on the depth chart in a middling SEC team when you can go start for someone else. So suddenly, Southern teams can't pay everyone more than their northern contemporaries. They can't hog talent unlike their northern contemporaries, and they can't just command the room. So what we're seeing is teams like Michigan in 23, Ohio State in 24, Indiana in 25, who, utilizing superior coaching and veteran talent, are just dominating right now. But the question is, can the Big Ten sustain this? Is the SEC down and out forever? The answer is no. I think what you're going to see is much more like the NFL, where things just kind of, it's the Big Ten, and then it's the ACC, and then it's the Big 12, and then it's the SEC, and then it's the Big 12, and then it's the Big 10, and then it's the ACC, and then it's the ACC, and it just goes back and forth and back and forth, and everybody's winning the chip every time. Like, the days of it like SEC, 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 SEC for like 9 in a row, I just don't think I think that's over. It's going to be more like the NFL, where maybe the Patriots win it one year, and then it's the Eagles, and then it's the Chiefs, and then it's the Seahawks, and then it's the Broncos and the Bills and whatever. So we're going to see a lot of parity, because suddenly you have to re-recruit your whole roster every season, and your high school guys may not stick around, and you're constantly like, the teams that are winning right now are getting experienced quarterbacks from the portal, and they're having veteran leadership, and they're just kind of building depth wherever they can manage the best they can manage. Those are the teams that are winning right now. So for the SEC, if they want to get back on top, they got to sort out their coaching, because there's some low quality coaching in the SEC right now, and they got to get lucky. They got to just be more physical than the teams up north. They got to recapture the advantages that they used to have. Do I think they can do it? Yes and no. I wouldn't be surprised if more often than not, if the Big Ten wins the championship, just because there are a lot of teams in the Big Ten: USC, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, just to start naming a few, with lots of money and lots of power and good coaches and talented players who might be able to make a run if the stars line. Indiana, I almost forgot Indiana, who is the big towering colossus titan of college football right now. So it remains to be seen whether or not the SEC is going to go away and diminish and fade, and journey to the west like it's the Lord of the Rings, the elves. But the era of one conference dominance is over. But I think we're in an era of supreme parity. Now, this isn't going to last forever. Eventually, this Wild West routine is going to stop, whether that's because the NCAA does something that doesn't lose in court, or Congress passes a law, or the teams just say, hey, we need a new governing structure. Whatever it ends up being, the party's not going to last forever. But while the party is going, while the drinks are being served, and the hot women are dancing on the dance floor, while that's all going on, yeah, I think the Big Ten's got some serious advantages right now. They're a loaded conference with a lot of money and a lot of talent and great coaches. Dan Lanning, Ryan Day, Kurt Signetti, Matt Campbell, Kyle Whittingham, Lincoln Riley to a lesser extent, Matt Rule to a lesser extent. You've got solid, good coaches in the Big Ten who are finally able to tap into resources that Southern teams have just kind of always had. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. Now, we'll see on the future. We'll see, Maybe Miami wins this year and the Big Ten's dominance just kind of stops after 2 years. Or maybe the next year it's Texas Tech. Or, hell, maybe the SEC wins. Georgia bullies their way to a championship in 26, and that's that. Whatever whatever the truth ends up being in the long run, the way it used to be is done. It's like the Joker in The Dark Knight when he talks to the mob in that meeting scene in the beginning. The Batman has changed things. All the mobsters want to go back to the way things were, but those days are done. The world is a different place. So for college football, we're not going back to institutionalized advantages in the South. Welcome to the era of parity. Enjoy the ride. Maybe your team can win too. All right, let's get some quick hits. So Ole Miss QB Trinidad Chambliss was denied his 6th year. His college career is over. I do not remember if that had come out before last week's episode, so I figured I would. I know it didn't, because it happened. It came out after the national championship, after the semifinal game. So yeah, so we're talking about that. So this makes sense, because he was trying to argue that him and his agent were trying to argue that he had this thing, this injury this one year, and it prevented him from playing, but then the NCAA just produced a note from his team doctor back then that's saying, yeah, he's feeling great and he's recovering well. And they're like, yeah, you're not getting a 6th year. Your eligibility's up. Ultimately, I think he'll be the fourth quarterback off the board. Third or fourth. It'll be Fernando Mendoza, Dante Moore. Maybe it's Trinidad Chambliss. Maybe it's Carson Beck. Who knows? There's going to be... I don't know what quarterbacks are going to be in the draft this year until the championship is over, I think. A major meeting is taking place next week to determine the future of the format of the college football playoffs. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey supports a 16-team format that likely has 5 conference champs and 11 at-large bids. But the Big Ten under Commissioner Tony Petitti wants some version of a 24-team playoff, but opposition remains, with many thinking that going from 12 to 24 is too big of a jump at this time, though there is openness to maybe going from 16 to 24 in like 3 or 4 years and kind of resting at 24 after teams have had a chance to eliminate their conference championship games and come up with some form of play-in format or however that ended up being a thing. Either way, it's looking likely that some version of a 16-team playoff is going to be the new format after this next week when this meeting takes place. So we will stay tuned for that. Maybe I'll cover that in quick hits next week if we have any news, because I have a feeling this is going to be the last episode of the College Football Roundup before we just go to a change in the format, so to speak. I was going to wait until like the 17th of February, but I'm thinking maybe next week is when the 17th of February is the 1-year anniversary of my podcast. So maybe we'll just change the format next week. Either way, it depends on how things are going. If I got a lot to say on college football, then we'll stick to the College Football Roundup for at least one more week. And I will make that H. James K. Fixes College Football episode. That is definitely coming. I just don't know when it's going to be because part of me wants to wait till the season's over so we can kind of take the whole season as it was in its entirety. Either way, look for that in the future. It'll definitely come out. I've got it written up. It's on my desktop. It's already written. I just got to sit down and record it. Maybe that'll be an off-season kind of episode. Either way, it's definitely coming. All right, for those of you listening on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and everywhere else that podcasts are available, thank you. Please consider liking and subscribing. Tell your friends and family about the podcast so we can spread the word. For those of you watching on YouTube, thank you, and thank you. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon to feed the algorithm. Leave a comment to feed the algorithm. Let's get some engagement going so we can keep growing. Hopefully we can get that 10th subscriber again. We had a 10th subscriber for about a week and a half, about 7 months ago, but they went away and we haven't gotten back. So let's get that 10th subscriber. Can we do that to start off the new year? Either way, my name is H. James K. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.